First one we'll look at this morning is jointing of copper pipe using the solder technique. Okay. And we're going to be using end feed solder joints. Okay. There are two different types. We have end feed and integral solder ring. Okay. We'll be using the end feed ones because it takes a little bit more skill. They're also cheaper and gives you better practice at the technique. Most people refer to these as Yorkshire fittings. That's just the company who makes them because of an integral solder ring on the inside. End feed fittings require you to put solder in directly from the end. And when you're using the solder, it's important, you read what it says on the end, we have to use lead-free solder. It is illegal to use solder with lead in for hot and cold water services. The key to soldering is preparation. Okay? All jointing surfaces must be spotlessly clean. All the ends of the pipe must be cleaned. So any oxidation is taken off and it won't hinder the soldering process. Once all the surfaces are cleaned, pop them together. Check the fittings. You don't need to clean the outside of the fitting, only the inside. So that ensures with all jointing surfaces clear. Then we're going to use flux. Flux has two purposes. One, it acts as a lubricant for the solder to go around the joint. And secondly, it will stop any further oxidation of the pipe for up to 30 minutes. Once it starts to go a little bit green, that means it's losing its properties. Wipe it off, re-clean, reapply. Apply the flux to the pipe only. There's no need to put it into the fitting, that's too much. That joint's now ready for soldering. It can be left like for 30 minutes, and if you want to do multiple soldering, remember, don't leave the flux on too long. That joint's now ready for soldering. Okay, and if you want to do multiple joints, remember not to leave it there for longer than 30 minutes. Then we're going to use a blowtorch. Okay? The key to soldering with the blowtorch is, it is the copper melts the solder, not the flame. The flame will get the copper hot enough to melt the solder. Common mistakes that happen. People fire up the torch and the solder at the same time and go in at the same time. The flame is melting the solder before the copper is ready to receive it, and it will just drop off onto the floor. So we heat the copper up till it's hot enough, we touch it with the solder, and it will melt and go around through capillary action. Okay, little tricks to use to help. Bend the end of the solder like that, so we can apply pressure with our finger to help put it onto the end of the joint. And when you're soldering, no more than 10 millimeters per joint. Getting the flame right. Turn on the gas, turn on the torch. And when you see the flame, okay, the flame comes up, the flame is that long. But when I fire the torch up, notice there's a bright blue piece at the bottom. Just in front of that blue piece is known as the neutral point of the flame. We don't want it on too powerful. That's enough for 15 millimeter pipe. Now when I'm using the torch, I'm going to warm the joint up, then I'm going to hold the torch over the fitting and the pipe. And when I think it's hot enough, I'm going to move the torch away and at the same time apply pressure to the solder, and it will run round the joint. that's the first one. Doesn't take too long for the second one. And that is the joint soldered. Now if you look closely, you'll see little brown flecks. That is the flux that hasn't yet been used. As the solder's gone in, it's pushed some of the flux out. A bad habit people do in industry is use more flux. Don't do that. We've just turned the solder from a solid to a liquid. Give it 30 seconds. Let it go back to a solid again. After 30 seconds, with a damp rag, not wet, just slightly damp, so you don't give the joint thermal shock, and you just wipe it over. That will clean up the joint along with the rest of the pipe, and then we'll all oxidize together, and it will prevent the joints and the pipe from turning green. That is now the joint finally soldered.